Hey everyone, have you ever been playing Warhammer 40k and wondered what the current equivalent to the Space Marine Legion that you're playing or playing against would be? Because I have. And I actually had an opportunity to have this conversation today while actually playing with some new friends that I made at my local game store. And it was a lot of fun to really discuss with some veterans what military units in the United States military equate to the Space Marine legions and why. There's a lot that goes into this thought process, and we spent the entire 2.5 hour game actually discussing this, while my Votan and one of the guys in Tempestus Militarum were squaring off against each other. And I have to say, his Tempestus Militarum are spectacular. So if he sees it, they're really, really cool. I know I said that at least a half dozen times while we were playing, but he killed the paint job on them, and it was really fun to play against, and it was a really, really fun game. I lost in a close game, but it was a lot of fun, and it's some of the most fun I've had in a long time playing with new people. I've recently run into a rash of new people who are either brand new, so I end up having to teach the game to, which isn't a problem. I'm happy to do it, but it kind of sucks when it's almost every game you play at the LGS. Or are the tournament heavy players that my semi-fluffy lists don't tend to hold up against. So it's not really fun for either of us because he's looking for a challenge and I'm looking for just some fun time. But today it was a bunch of people just having fun hanging out on a Saturday afternoon. So we were able to really enjoy our time playing the game, learning about some of their military history, including one of the guys actually talked about how while he was on deployment, he'd actually gotten with a few buddies and they used rocks and other pieces of equipment that they had found in order to represent 40k characters, and used white dwarf articles or the index that they'd been sent, or a few of the codexes that they'd brought with them as well to play the game, because they weren't able to bring everything with them to play, but they played with what they had. And it was one of the things that helped keep them sane during some of the toughest parts of their deployment. So this entire conversation really sparked an idea for me that I wanted to get out on video and really give you a good comparison of what these Space Marine Legions look like with their modern equivalent. I will say a couple caveats. First off, we're basing the Space Marine Legions on what they were designed to do by the Emperor, which means we're doing all 18 legions based on that. So traitor or not, that doesn't matter for this conversation. We're specifically focusing on if the Emperor had his way, here's what the 18 legions would look like and what their modern US military equivalents are, because there's a lot of them. On top of that, there's a lot of different options for several of these legions. I went with ones that either I know someone from personally, or one of the guys I was talking to knew someone personally from, that gave us a good firsthand opinion on why this legion needs to be represented by this unit. And throughout all of this, if you guys see one that you think is a better fit, or have some from personal experience that you think need to go in a different place, let me know in the comments below. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think. Also, I went with the US military because that's what I have the most experience with. As you can probably hear from my accent, I am a US citizen. On top of that, I work with a lot of veterans. I have a lot of veteran friends, and I'm pretty heavily involved in the military community as well as military charities and things like that. So for me, that is what I was able to easily come up with. If you would like me to tackle other nations as well, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do the research and do as much work as I can to try and get that right. But for now, let's talk about the USA and their military units that equate to Space Marine legions. Okay, we're going to go in numerical order. So the very first one is the Dark Angels. It's actually an army that I'm currently working on building. You can kind of see them over my shoulder. They're not painted yet, mostly. So it's just kind of a black hole from the camera view. Hopefully I'll get those painted soon. But the Dark Angels were a pretty easy one for me. I have worked with a lot of US Marines, and there's one group that is both secretive and wildly destructive at the same time. That's the MARSOC Raiders. MARSOC Raiders are technically a special forces unit that operates a little bit more in the open than most special forces units. They are key at collecting intel, both violently and non-violently, as well as securing and protecting intel. They also operate in lightning maneuvers that are very reminiscent of the Dark Angels. So you get to see a lot of variety from them, just like the Dark Angels, because they were the first Legion. We're kind of responsible for doing everything until the rest of the Legion show up. MARSOC does everything. While they're not a master of anything, they are a jack of all trades. They can be put in any situation and do anything at any time and do it extremely well. They may be outclassed slightly in specialities by other special forces units, but they are one of the two special forces units that can be called up to do anything that is needed. And for that reason, they're the Dark Angels. It's a really straightforward one-to-one relationship there. And besides the Dark Angels being a little bit more extreme on their sneakiness and secrets, it's pretty much identical. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if the creators of Warhammer 40k may have been loosely inspired by the MARSOCs or one of their older equivalents. I'm sure the British military also has some in there. I've heard the Royal Marines tend to be very similar in there, but once again, I don't know, and I haven't looked into it, so I don't dare say for 100% surety there. Next, we're going to tackle the Third Legion, the Emperor's Children. And if you don't know why I just skipped 2, look into it. I don't want to get hit by the Inquisition. Next, we're going to do the Emperor's Children, the Third Legion. This one was a little bit harder. It took us probably the longest on this one, as well as the Word Bearers, which we'll get to later, to really figure out exactly which part of the U.S. military would be an equivalent to the Emperor's Children because of some of their unique traits. And the one we were able to come up with the best is the U.S. Army 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. This Armored Cavalry Regiment is an active combat unit, but they're also responsible for a lot of things like parades and things where the U.S. military needs to show force in a more passive way. So they tend to be a little bit more showy. This gives them a little bit more of that Emperor's Children to what they really are. And for this unit, the 11th Armored Cavalry, that is not a negative. They're very good at what they do. They are still an Armored Cavalry Regiment, which means they work with Strykers and Bradleys to move a lot of troops to different places quickly and look good doing it. So for this reason, we went there. The Emperor's Children are famous for using a lot of vehicles to transport themselves, especially land raiders. So it did fit, but it did, like I said, this one took quite a while to figure out, including doing a little bit of research and diving into more of the history of units to get it right. Next, we're going to dive into the Iron Warriors. The Iron Warriors was another pretty easy one. One of the guys at the tabletop actually used to belong to this unit, so it came up almost instantly as we were discussing it, and that is the 75th Field Artillery in the U.S. Army. They are very much the closest we get to a siege army in the U.S. military in modern style. They're what you think of when you think of heavy artillery, and if it ever results in trench warfare, that's what they're going to be doing. They're very good at what they do at ranged artillery as well as breaking enemy positions. So it was a pretty easy choice for the Iron Warriors and a really good one-to-one as well. We're going to jump over to the next Legion, which is my first Legion, the White Scars. So there's a little bit of a ring light reflection there, but you can actually see the con over my shoulder right there. The White Scars were another pretty easy one for me. They're very fast and very good at striking where they're least expected to strike. And in a lot of cases, unless we go special forces, which don't fit because the White Scars may be fast and surprise people, they're not sneaky. They fly in and smash things. That's what they do. And in the U.S. military, there's a few units that specialize in that, but there's one that comes to mind, especially because of history and honestly some movies, and that is the U.S. Army Air Cavalry. There's several different units, but we wanted to generalize on this one because none of us have experience with any one unit, and every single unit tends to operate very similarly. They move in fast, they strike fast, and they hit as hard as needed. They tend to use helicopters instead of bikes most often, but the use of vehicles like ATVs and bikes is not uncommon for Air Cav as well. So that gives us a lot of things to work with and is very, very White Scars-esque. Besides the Mongolian feel, they feel very similar. And honestly, it would not shock me at all if some Air Cav soldiers actually do take on some of the Mongolian traits there, as in personality and things like that. Just because going fast and hitting hard is what they do. And that entire system and how they work was originally pioneered by the Mongols, which is why they were used as the foundation for the White Scars as well. Next, we'll move on to the 6th Legion, which is the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves were a little bit harder for me to pick out. There's a lot of talk online about what people tend to think, and I tend to disagree with them. A lot of people suggest the Army Rangers here. I don't actually think so. I think there's a better fit for the Army Rangers. And that's because the Space Wolves tend to be a lot more jubilant and loud with the way they do things. Whereas most Army Rangers I've ever met, while they do party, they tend to be the quieter group in the party, while the Marines and the Airborne tend to be a lot louder. They're a lot more wild and free, which is why I actually went with the 11th Airborne, known as the Arctic Angels. They are a winter warfare specialist airborne unit, which is about as close as you can get to a modern Viking in the US military. They specialize in a lot of the things that the Space Wolves actually specialize in as well, and I'm sure if you gave them the opportunity to ride giant wolves, they absolutely would. So for me, it felt like the 11th Airborne was a much better fit than the Army Rangers, and we'll talk about where the Army Rangers apply because they definitely are on this list. And I think there's just a slightly better fit for them. So next we'll move on to the 7th Legion, which is the Imperial Fists. The Imperial Fists were a really easy one as well. This is one that came up pretty much in the first 2 minutes of conversation when we started talking about which Legion was which unit, and that is the Army Corps of Engineers. The Emperor's builders and Castellans fit just perfectly with the Army Corps of Engineers. We did talk a little bit about the CBs, but it just didn't really fit because the CBs tend to be a lot more wild and free than the uptight, rigid, regimented Sons of Dorn. And to us, the Army Corps of Engineers just fit that so much better. And because of their decorum and how they position themselves in a lot of outward things, as well as they tend to do a lot of defensive construction, not offensive construction. For that, I also thought about using the CBs for the Iron Warriors, but it didn't really fit there either, especially because of personality and how they function. The CBs tend to be a very offensive construction crew that will commandeer anything they need to make it happen and specialize in some sneaky shenanigans to always get the job done. And that's not who either the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's Children are. And it actually is kind of disappointing that we don't have a CBs unit in the Space Marine Legions. Maybe that would be a fun Iron Warriors spinoff. Get a loyalist Iron Warriors, because some of them did stay loyal. We do know that from the Horus Heresy lore. And give me Sons of Perturabo that have remained loyal to the Emperor, but have shunned a lot of the traits that made their old Legion turn. So they tend to lean a little bit more Space Wolves-esque, while still being very construction heavy. And I think you'd get a really, really fun Legion. So there's just an idea for you if you're looking to create something with that spin-off. You could also do it from the Sons of Dorn, but because of the influence of the groups like Imperial Fists and the Black Templars, I don't know if a Legion could really pull that off. It would be fun. It really would, to see a Son of Dorn in that very jovial, joking mood while still taking everything seriously, because it would drive the rest of the Sons of Dorn up the wall. They would not be okay with it, especially if that Legion was succeeding. If they were still able to do their job and do it extremely well, you couldn't really say anything about it. So I know I've gone a little bit long on this. We have a long list to go, and it is already a pretty long video, and we're not even halfway done. So next we're going to go with the 8th Legion. There we go. And the 8th Legion was a pretty hard one to do, because a lot of what the 8th Legion does is something that the US military absolutely abhors. They are not okay with it, and they actively fight against it. And that has been the case since the beginning. It's something that the British actually did to us during the American Revolution, the War of 1812. We also saw it with several Native American units where terror tactics were used. And ever since the beginning of the United States, we have not been okay with it at all. And it's led to us actively avoiding having units like this. But the closest we could get are the PSYOPs units. They don't do the same things as the Night Lords at all, but they'll do things like playing music really loud in the middle of the night with hidden speakers around the enemy camp. They'll make ghost noises. That's actually one of my favorite stories from Vietnam, where they learned about a couple mythology ghosts of mythology in Vietnam and started actually dressing dogs up to run through the forest in sparkly sheets that would glow in the moonlight, as well as playing haunting sounds with things like screams and ghostly wails with hidden loudspeakers throughout the jungle, so it would echo throughout the valley. And it actually got to the point where several large army level units of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army actually refused to go into these valleys because they were sure it was haunted. And then when US Marines were seen going in and out of there, it actually terrified them more because they thought that the Marines were immune to the ghosts. So it is kind of Night Lord-esque. The Night Lords are one of the few that we kind of had to stretch to get to, but I think it ended up being a decent fit. If you have a better fit, let me know in the comments below. There may be another one that fits better that I'm not aware of, but that was the best one we could come up with. Next, we're going to move on to the 9th Legion. This is the Blood Angels. This was one that we actually talked about and came up with several different options, and we ended up settling on the 82nd Airborne. And the 82nd Airborne is one of the fastest and most important strike units that the US military has. They're responsible for being basically on call at all times so that they can be anywhere in the world within 18 hours. They're one of the few units that can be actively deployed without a declaration of war. The US Marines are the other one. We went back and forth on whether the Airborne or Marine Infantry would fall here. Both of them are pretty decent fits, but the Blood Angels are very much a shock and awe type unit. They hit fast and hit hard, and while they can stay for a slog, their specialty is getting in and securing an objective quickly and then fighting their way out. So we felt like the 82nd Airborne was a little bit closer stretch there, but like I said, this one has a lot of different units that could fit pretty well. They're a really fascinating unit, and the whole bloodlust thing isn't too common, but the way they fight and the way they function is something that is pretty common throughout the US military. Next, we're going to go on to the 10th Legion, which is the Iron Hands. This is another one that had a bunch of different options, actually, but we wanted to represent their combat style instead of their culture, which means we ended up going with the 1st Armored, the US Army 1st Armored, also known as Old Ironsides. This is one of America's first, oh, it is America's first tank brigade that it is in existence, and is one of the most successful that we've had. The third armor does get up there too, but these guys love their tanks, they're obsessed with their tanks, and that is how they function, which made it a really good fit. They're a vehicle heavy unit, and it paired very well with the Iron Hands. Okay, next we're going to go to not the 11th. So same thing as the 2nd Legion. If you don't know, look it up. We'll leave the Inquisition alone to figure that one out. Next, we're going to go on to the 12th. The 12th is the World Eaters. The World Eaters was a pretty hard one because there's a lot of units that could be there, but there's not a lot of them that love destruction as much as the 101st does. The 101st is famous for their ability to get in, hold ground, and either take a beating or give a beating. They're a unit that goes above and beyond to just destroy enemy units. If you go back to World War II, the Battle of Bastogne is the perfect example, where they were completely encircled and cut off for quite a while. And the amount of Germans that were thrown at them was absolutely insane. And they managed to hold out throughout until they were able to be saved. Saved isn't the right word. Any 101st World War II veteran would probably shoot me for using that word, but they were able to be reconnected to the rest of the army and reunite with that push back forward after the army had caught back up to them. So it was a pretty good decision there. I think there's a couple others that could fit. Honestly, one of the ones that we used for the Dark Angels could be there as well. The MARSOCs tend to do pretty much the same thing in more modern days, but I think the 101st, mostly because of their history, was a better fit here. Next, we're going to go to the 13th Legion, and that is the Ultramarines. This one was pretty hard, actually, because there's not really a unit that tends to do what the Ultra... Well, there's one, but most of the US military has specialties. And having the Ultramarines that are really just kind of generic and do a lot of the same thing decently well, or do a lot of different things decently well, was pretty hard to find. And then one of the guys at the table pointed out the blatantly obvious 1st Infantry, or the Big Red One. They fit this to a T. They're a unit that has a long history of being an infantry unit, but pulling in every aspect of everything into their structure. This gives them the ability to function and maneuver and do whatever they need to do. And that's why they're often called up into large engagements that are large, sweeping throughout territory that needs to be held or cleared of enemy forces. And this is something we see a lot with the Ultramarines as well. Due to their numbers and their size, which is also true about the Big Red One, they're a lot of times the unit that's used for the central thrust. Okay, next we're going to go on to the 14th Legion, and that is the Death Guard. The Death Guard was a pretty hard one for us to figure out until we realized there is a US Army unit that does a lot of this anyways. They don't actively use the weapons. Their job is to mitigate them and to take them away from the enemy. But the amount of time they spend around all of these dangerous gases and biological weapons and things like that made them the obvious choice. And that's the 20th CBRNE Command. Their job is, if you don't know what CBRNE is, it's chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear, and explosives. So their job is to mitigate all of this super, super dangerous stuff that is often super, super illegal, and remove it from the battlefield and learn how to react to it and develop equipment to counter it. So really, they're the anti-death guard, but it's the closest we're going to get. Okay, next we're going to go on to the 15th Legion, which is one that I actually own over here in this cabinet, and that is the Thousand Suns. This was a little bit of a hard one because no one in the U.S. military uses magic. So we went with the Space Command. We could also do Missile Command here as well, but we went with the Space Force in general because of all of the extraterrestrial stuff they do and the big brain stuff that the Space Force tends to handle nowadays, now that they've become an actual branch. It was a pretty decently easy choice. There were some other options we could have gone with as well, but I feel like that one was the best one for it. Next, we're going to talk about the 16th Legion, which is, I still call it the Lunar Wolves. For me, I'm really disappointed that we didn't get to see more of the Lunar Wolves being the Lunar Wolves. The first book in Horus Rising is one of my favorite Horus Heresy books still to this day because of the way Gavial Loken and his Lunar Wolves worked and all of the cool things they did. And for me, these guys are the true Army Rangers. They're specializing in getting in and assassinations, whether assassinations or critical strikes. Their job is to get in and get in fast, remove the threat, and get out. And that is what the Lunar Wolves do. A lot of the missions you see them going on in compliance aren't like some of the other legions. You don't see them doing the World Leader's job where the World Leaders walk in and just destroy everything. You don't see them doing the Thousand Suns job where the Thousand Suns go in and try and recover as much knowledge as possible while taking control of the key centers. You also don't see them doing a lot of the word bearers jobs, which is assimilation or bringing people over to their side with words. You see the Lunar Wolves doing targeted, accurate strikes on specific locations, which is what Army Rangers do. So for me, they were a pretty obvious fit. Next, we're going to talk about the word bearers, the 17th Legion, which I kind of already mentioned a little bit of what they do. A lot of what the word bearers were intended to do before the religious zealotry got involved was be ambassadors and trainers to those that were friendly to them. They were intended to go into the very Imperium friendly worlds and bring them to compliance quickly and easily by teaching them about what the Imperium had to offer and using force if necessary, but hopefully pulling more allies than creating enemies. And there is actually a U.S. military unit that handles that. I'm going to look over here because I actually wrote it down in the wrong place. There is the U.S. Security Force Assistance Brigades that are responsible for training allies and recruiting people to join the Americans as allies or temporary units. And for me, this is the best equivalent to the word bearers. I know a lot of people are going to say the Chaplain Corps. That isn't what the word bearers were intended to do. That's more of what the word bearers became. And while I think both are accurate, because depending on which perspective you're looking at, if you're looking at what the word bearers became post-Lorgar, then you're right. It is the Chaplain Corps. If you're looking at what the Emperor intended, I think the Security Forces Assistance Brigades are a better representation of what the word bearers were supposed to be. Next, we have the 18th Legion. The 18th Legion was a little bit harder because the flamethrower was actually removed from service in the U.S. military in 1979, which means there are not flamethrower troops in the U.S. military. So I had to go with a little bit different approach and look at the culture and how they function, minus flamethrowers. And one of the best examples I was able to find is the U.S. Marine Corps' 3rd EOD. This unit, while dealing with high explosives and things of that nature, also work heavily with civilians. They work on demining missions. They work on how to spot and report IEDs in combat zones. They teach civilians how to protect themselves from explosives and explosive materials, how to properly build things like propane stoves to avoid propane gas explosions and things of that nature. So they do a lot of stuff for the civilian side while also being experts on fire and explosives. So for me, it felt like a pretty good fit for the Salamanders, at least as best as we could get. If we go back into World War II, there were several units that had a lot of flamethrowers and flamethrower tanks that we could pull, but because none of that is currently active, it just didn't feel right given the nature of the list. Next, we're going to go to the 19th Legion, also another Legion that I am currently working on, and that is the Raven Guard. The Raven Guard have a lot of different special forces units that could be an equivalent. For me, I went with the Navy SEALs just due to their nature. They are sneaky, but they're sneaky in the sneaky strike way, not the sneaky way. They specialize in getting in and getting out without ever being known that they were there. They have a lot of snipers as well as close combat units that are trained, and they do infiltrations through any means necessary. This is something that tends to be more SEAL than anything else. While yes, Delta Force may fit in here as well, Delta tends to operate in specific circumstances, whereas the SEALs will do sea, air, and land. So they tend to do a little bit more of that broad spectrum infiltration that I think the Raven Guard specializes in. So U.S. Navy SEALs for the Raven Guard. And finally, the Alpha Legion, the Legion I do not like, because their version of sneaky is not okay in pretty much any general sense of the word. And for me, I felt wrong actually putting this on anybody, because a lot of what the Alpha Legion does violates the oaths that soldiers take. The Alpha Legion is famous for doing attacks against foes, both foreign and domestic, as well as civilians, other Space Marine legions, other parts of the Alpha Legion, pretty much anything that gets in their way in any way, shape, or form. Somebody who sneezes in the wrong direction, they will actively disrupt and murder them and do things to completely ruin their day. So for me, I didn't want to put an actual military unit here. I went with the CIA. They, in the past, have done exactly that. There's no secret that during the Cold War, the CIA operated both domestically and internationally, and operated against U.S. citizens. There's several congressional hearings that actually talk about this, and there's now rules in place that do not allow the CIA to operate inside the United States. They're supposed to work in tandem with the FBI. Whether or not that happens is well above my pay grade. I have no idea. But the CIA felt like the best fit here, partially because I didn't want to actually put a military unit in this place, because it felt like it was a pretty straight up insult, especially to anyone in the intelligence community inside the US military. Okay, this has been a long video, and I've had a lot of fun compiling this list and had a lot of fun working with several veterans that we were playing with at my LGS today. And I hope you guys have enjoyed that as well. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and ring that little bell so you get notified anytime we have some new videos coming out. If you would like to see anything like this as well, whether it be other militaries, or if we go major factions inside NATO or around the world that would be represented by 40K factions or anything along those lines, let me know if you have any cool ideas like that or things you'd like to see. We're also going to be doing some lore accurate armies coming up. We have the Salamanders and the Blood Angels. I know I promised them last week, but this video was just too much fun to do to not fit in here. But you'll be seeing those coming here in the next few weeks. And if you have any other legions you want to see, or if you want me to do some Xenos or anything like that in the lore accurate armies, let me know in the comments below as well. And thank you for joining us. I'll see you guys next time.